The eviction notice changed my life in ways I never could have predicted, arriving on an ordinary Tuesday morning, while my coffee was still brewing and my 7-year-old daughter Emma was fighting with her cereal spoon. I held that thin piece of paper in my hands, reading the same words over and over, trying to make them mean something different. Rent increase of $400 monthly, effective in 30 days. $400 might as well have been $4,000 given my bank account balance and the child support payments that had stopped coming 6 months ago when my ex-husband Marcus decided that relocating to Nevada without telling anyone was an acceptable life choice. I worked at Riverside Dental on the east side of Seattle, a small practice where I'd been a hygienist for almost 9 years. The pay was decent enough to cover our basic needs, keep Emma in her elementary school, maintain our modest 2-bedroom apartment in a building that had seen better decades. Dr. Patterson was kind, the hours were predictable, and I'd built a routine that felt safe and manageable. But $400 more per month would shatter that careful balance completely. Emma had already been through so much with the divorce, watching her father pack his things and leave without explanation, adjusting to weekends that never included him anymore, learning to stop asking when Daddy would visit. The school she attended was 3 blocks from our apartment, walking distance on days when the weather cooperated, and she'd made friends there who actually came to her birthday parties and invited her to theirs. Uprooting her again felt like a cruelty I couldn't justify, another failure in a growing list of ways I hadn't been able to protect her from life's disruptions. My friend Rachel mentioned it casually during our weekly video call, the way you mention a new restaurant or a sale at Target. She'd been supplementing her income through online content creation for about 6 months, nothing too revealing, she insisted, just tasteful photos that helped her pay off her credit card debt and start saving for a real vacation. Rachel had always been more adventurous than me, more comfortable with her body, more willing to take risks I found terrifying. But when she mentioned the monthly numbers, my hand froze on my wine glass. The decision took 3 sleepless nights of calculations and rationalizations. I researched extensively, reading through forums and guides, learning about privacy settings and digital security, understanding the difference between platforms and their various protection levels. I created new email addresses, chose a username that bore no resemblance to my real name, and invested in a cheap laptop that would never connect to my work network or personal accounts. The VPN software felt like overkill at first, but every article I read emphasized the importance of layers between your real life and your online presence. My content was deliberately conservative compared to what flooded these platforms. Lingerie photos taken in careful angles, workout clothes that showed my figure without revealing anything explicit, the kind of images that could almost pass as fitness content if you squinted and used your imagination. I never showed my face clearly, always shooting from angles that captured my body while keeping my identity obscured. The bedroom I used for photos was decorated specifically for filming, with neutral sheets and generic decorations that bore no resemblance to my actual bedroom, where Emma's crayon drawings decorated my nightstand and stuffed animals occasionally invaded my pillow space. Within 6 weeks, I was making enough to cover the rent increase with some left over for Emma's birthday present and a visit to the dentist I'd been postponing. The guilt gnawed at me during parent-teacher conferences, sitting there in my conservative blouse and cardigan while Miss Henderson praised Emma's progress. In reading, knowing that I'd been up until 2 in the morning the night before taking photos in my underwear for strangers on the internet. But Emma's school supply list was fully checked off for the first time in 2 years, and I'd managed to buy her new sneakers without having to choose between that and groceries. The building where we lived was one of those 1970s constructions that had been minimally maintained over the decades, with thin walls that transmitted every conversation and footstep, a shared laundry room in the basement that always smelled vaguely of mildew, and a landlord who fixed things only when legally compelled. Carl had lived in the apartment directly below ours for almost 7 years, according to the building manager, a quiet man in his mid-40s who worked from home doing something technical with computers. Our interactions had always been minimal and polite, the kind of neighborly relationship that consisted entirely of brief hallway greetings and apologizing when Emma's bouncing disrupted his ceiling. The shift in his behavior was subtle enough at first that I convinced myself I was imagining it. He started appearing in the hallway more frequently, always seeming to check his mail right when I was leaving for work, watering the same potted plant by his door multiple times as I carried groceries up the stairs. His offers to help became more persistent, insisting on carrying my bags even when I clearly had them handled, asking questions about my schedule that felt slightly too detailed for casual conversation. Then he mentioned how tired I looked one morning, saying I must have stayed up late. Again, and something about the knowing tone in his voice made my skin crawl. He couldn't possibly know about my late-night activities, I told myself. Plenty of single mothers looked tired. But when he commented on my new curtains a week later, curtains I'd installed specifically in my filming room and nowhere else visible from outside, my heart began racing in a way that had nothing to do with climbing stairs. The encounters escalated with a deliberateness that felt choreographed. Carl began shopping at the same grocery store I used, appearing in my aisle with a cart that was always suspiciously empty, making comments about my food choices that felt invasive rather than friendly. He joined the small gym I'd been attending for 3 years, a place I'd specifically chosen because it was far from my neighborhood and work. Yet there he was on the treadmill next to mine, talking about workout routines while his eyes traveled across my body in a way that made me want to shower immediately. The breaking point arrived on a Saturday when Emma was at a birthday party and I was finally enjoying a rare afternoon alone. Carl knocked on my door holding a package, claiming it had been delivered to his apartment by mistake. But when I reached for it, he held it back slightly, stepping closer into my doorway uninvited. That's when he said something that turned my blood to ice water. He mentioned a small birthmark on my left hip, describing its exact shape and location, saying I should really have a doctor look at it because it seemed irregular. That birthmark was always covered by my everyday clothes, invisible in any casual context. The only place it appeared was in certain photos I'd posted online, photos that were carefully cropped to never show my face, my apartment, or any identifying features. I'd been so careful about backgrounds, checking every reflection, ensuring nothing personal was ever visible. But somehow, this man who lived one floor below me had connected my online presence to my real identity with enough certainty to bring it up in casual conversation. I shut the door so quickly I nearly caught his fingers in it, my hands shaking as I turned every lock and leaned against the wood, trying to breathe normally while my mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe he'd seen me at the community pool last summer, but no. I always wore a one-piece that covered that area. Maybe through my window somehow, but my blinds were always closed when I changed, and the angle from his apartment wouldn't work anyway. The more I searched for innocent explanations, the more the awful truth settled into my bones like concrete. I spent the next hour examining every photo and video I'd ever posted with microscopic attention, zooming in on backgrounds, checking for reflections in windows or mirrors, looking for any detail that might have given me away. My face was always obscured or cut from frame. I'd been meticulous about that. The furniture in my filming area was completely different from my actual bedroom. I'd used different sheets, different decorations, creating a space that bore no resemblance to where I actually lived. Then I remembered something that made my stomach drop. About 3 weeks ago, I'd splurged on expensive emerald green sheets, the kind of luxury I normally couldn't justify, but they'd been on sale and I was feeling optimistic about my earnings. I'd used them in one video before transferring them to my actual bed because they were too nice to save only for filming, and Carl had commented on them just last week, mentioning through my door when I didn't answer. Quickly enough that he'd noticed I'd gotten new bedding. That emerald was a good color for me. That night, after Emma fell asleep clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop screen, trying to understand how this was possible. I'd been so careful. I'd read all the guides, followed all the recommendations, maintained strict separation between my online presence and my real life. Yet somehow someone had bridged that gap, had been watching me closely, enough to make connections I'd believed were impossible to make. The router incident happened purely by accident while I was trying to fix Emma's tablet that kept disconnecting from the internet. I'd never bothered checking the router settings before, assuming that the basic password the internet company provided was sufficient. But while troubleshooting Emma's connection issue, I navigated to the device list and saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. There were the expected connections: my phone, my laptop, Emma's tablet, the smart TV we barely used. But at the bottom of the list was an entry labeled only as device hidden with an IP address I didn't recognize. According to the router logs, this device had been connected to my network for almost 4 months, consuming enormous amounts of upload bandwidth during specific hours that coincided exactly with my filming schedule. I took screenshots of everything, my hands trembling so badly I had to attempt several captures before getting clear images. The bandwidth usage graphs showed massive data transfers happening during my late night sessions, gigabytes of information flowing from my network to somewhere else. Whatever this device was, It wasn't just passively connected. It was actively transmitting something, recording and uploading data in real time. The police station was surprisingly busy for a Sunday morning filled with people, reporting stolen packages and noise complaints and minor traffic accidents. The officer at the front desk looked about my age but exhausted in a way that suggested multiple double shifts, and when I started trying to explain about online content creation and mysterious devices on my network, I could see her attention sharpening from routine boredom to genuine concern. Officer Daniels brought me to a back office and called in Detective Reeves, a man who looked like he'd spent the last decade staring at computer screens and hating every minute of it. He examined my router screenshots with an expression that grew increasingly grim, asking detailed questions about my apartment layout, my filming locations, and when I'd first noticed Carl's behavioral changes. When I mentioned the birthmark comment, his jaw tightened in a way that told me he'd seen cases like this before and knew exactly where it was heading. "This signature," he said, pointing at the bandwidth patterns on his screen, "matches hidden camera setups we've encountered in previous investigations. Small devices, battery-powered or hardwired, that connect to the victim's own Wi-Fi network to transmit footage in real time. The person watching doesn't even need to physically retrieve the device. They just sit in their apartment and watch everything on their computer screen." The words hit me like physical blows. Everything. My bedroom, my bathroom, my private moments with Emma, every conversation and vulnerable second of my life for the past 4 months had potentially been broadcast directly to Carl's apartment 1 floor below. The violation felt so complete and overwhelming that I actually bent forward in my chair, trying not to vomit on Detective Reeves's desk. We arranged for officers to come to my apartment that afternoon with detection equipment, timing it for when Emma would still be at her friend's house for another few hours. I couldn't bear the thought of her being there during the search, seeing her mother's life exposed in this way, learning that our home had been compromised by someone we'd trusted enough to exchange hallway pleasantries with for years. The detection device looked like something from a science fiction movie, a handheld unit with various sensors and a screen that displayed heat signatures and wireless signals. Detective Reeves moved through my apartment methodically, starting with the living room where the device emitted occasional beeps near electronics, which he assured me was normal interference. Emma's room was clear, thank God, showing no unusual signals. But when we entered my bedroom, the device began shrieking with an intensity that made all of us freeze. He traced the signal to the air conditioning vent on the wall opposite my bed, the vent I'd barely noticed in all the time I'd lived there, assuming it was just part of the building's climate system. Using a screwdriver from my kitchen drawer, Detective Reeves carefully removed the cover, and there it was. A device no larger than a car key fob, with a tiny lens barely visible among the vent, slats positioned perfectly to capture everything that happened in my bedroom. The camera was connected to a small battery pack and a Wi-Fi transmitter, all wedged into the vent space where I'd never thought to look. Detective Reeves bagged the evidence with gloved hands, his expression professionally neutral, but his movements sharp with barely contained anger. While he worked on his laptop, tracing the device's transmission history, I sat on Emma's bed in her room, staring at her wall of crayon drawings and school certificates, trying to process the reality that every private moment I'd had in my own bedroom for months had been watched by the man who lived below us. The IP address trail led exactly where we all knew it would. Carl's apartment, 1 floor down, where he'd been receiving a live feed of my bedroom broadcast directly to his computer. Detective Reeves showed me the data logs, timestamps that corresponded with my filming sessions, but also with ordinary moments, sleeping and changing clothes and having phone conversations I'd believed were private. Carl had been watching everything, not just my online content, but my actual life, collapsing the boundary I'd worked so hard to maintain. The arrest happened quickly once they had the evidence. I watched from my window as multiple officers entered the building, and within 20 minutes they were leading Carl out in handcuffs. He looked up at my window as they guided him toward the patrol car, and the expression on his face wasn't shame or fear. It was disappointment, like I'd ruined something he'd been enjoying, spoiled some entertainment he'd felt entitled to. The search of Carl's apartment revealed details that still haunt my sleep. 3 monitors in his bedroom, one dedicated entirely to the feed from my apartment, running 24 hours a day. External hard drives containing hundreds of hours of footage, organized by date and activity with labels that made me physically ill to read. But the worst discovery was what they found in a locked folder on his computer, comparison files where he'd matched my online content with the illegally recorded footage using facial recognition software and detailed notes to confirm his suspicions about my identity. He'd been building a comprehensive profile of my life, documenting my schedule down to 15-minute increments, noting when Emma left for school and returned, when I showered and worked out and slept. There were spreadsheets tracking my movements, notes about my routines, even speculation about my income and expenses. The detective said his level of organization suggested obsessive behavior that had likely been building for months before he'd worked up the courage to install the camera. The legal process moved faster than I'd expected. Carl's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The camera, the footage, the detailed logs, all of it pointed to months of premeditated surveillance and stalking. He received 18 months in prison, 3 years probation afterward, and a permanent restraining order. That legally prevented him from coming within 500 feet of Emma or me for the rest of his life. I moved us out of that building within a week, finding a new apartment across the city in a building with actual security cameras in the hallways and a landlord who actually responded to maintenance requests. The new place cost more than I wanted to pay, but it had solid doors and windows that locked properly and neighbors who minded their own business in a healthy way. I closed my online accounts immediately, deleted everything, lost that income stream that had briefly made life feel manageable. The financial pressure returned, forcing me to pick up extra shifts at the dental office and take on weekend work doing medical transcription from home. The pay was legitimate, but barely covered Emma's needs, and I found myself back in the same grinding cycle of barely making rent, choosing between necessities, watching my daughter's needs compete with bills that never stopped coming. Emma still doesn't know the full story. I told her we moved because of a problem with our old building that a neighbor had been inappropriate in ways I didn't specify, and she accepted this explanation with the resilience children sometimes show when they sense their parent can't handle deeper questions. But she notices things, the way I check every vent in our new apartment twice a week, running my fingers along the edges looking for anything unusual, the way I inspect every corner of her room before letting her sleep, the camera detection device I bought and use regularly, sweeping our space like I'm searching for bombs. Sometimes people at the dental office ask why I move so suddenly, why I seem so jumpy when someone walks too close behind me, why I've started covering my laptop camera with tape even at work. I give vague answers about needing a change, about prioritizing safety, about being more careful in general. The truth feels too heavy to share with casual acquaintances, too exposing in its own way, admitting that I'd created online content and someone had used it to violate me in my own home. The trauma therapist I started seeing says that hypervigilance is normal after what I experienced, that my constant checking and rechecking is my brain's way of trying to regain control over a situation where I'd been completely powerless. She says it will fade with time, that eventually I'll be able to sleep without waking up at every small sound, that Emma's innocence being preserved is a victory I should acknowledge rather than a burden I carry. But late at night, when Emma's asleep and I'm alone with my thoughts and my camera detector, I think about Carl sitting in his apartment 1 floor below, watching me live my life on his monitors. I think about how thin the walls were between my assumed privacy and his invasive observation, how the thing I'd done to protect my daughter from financial instability had made us both targets for someone's obsession. I think about the other women who might be experiencing this right now, who've made the same choices I did for the same reasons, unaware that someone is watching them through vents or mirrors or devices they'll never think to look for. The internet promises anonymity and distance and control, boundaries that separate your online self from your real life. But those boundaries are made of nothing but your own vigilance and the restraint of strangers. And when someone decides to cross them, when someone invests enough time and attention into collapsing the space between your digital presence and your physical vulnerability, those walls turn out to be as thin as the ones in my old apartment building. Paper barriers that can be breached by anyone with enough patience and access and the willingness to violate another person's basic humanity for their own entertainment. The divorce papers had been finalized for exactly 42 days when the reality of my financial situation finally penetrated the fog of anger and relief I'd been living in since the judge's signature made it official. I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Columbus, the kind of place you choose because it's available immediately and doesn't ask too many questions, working at Morrison's auto shop where I'd been for the past 9 years, changing oil and replacing transmissions and pretending I had any kind of career trajectory beyond just showing up and surviving another day. Child support for my daughter Kaylee took 40% of every paycheck before I even saw it, which was fair and necessary and still left me barely functional financially. The rest disappeared into rent and utilities and the credit card debt Jennifer and I had accumulated during our final year of marriage. When we were buying things, we couldn't afford to avoid acknowledging how completely we'd failed at building a life together. My 33rd birthday came and went without celebration, just another Tuesday where I ate gas station pizza and wondered how people made this whole adult existence thing look manageable. The OnlyFans advertisement appeared during one of those late-night phone scrolling sessions when you're too tired to sleep but too exhausted to do anything productive. People making thousands monthly, acclaimed, just by sharing photos and videos, building audiences and connections with people who appreciated you exactly as you were. The whole concept seemed absurd and vaguely embarrassing. But after 3 beers and another rejection email from a better-paying job, I figured why not look into it. Setting up the account felt surreal in ways I couldn't quite articulate, taking photos in my bathroom mirror, while strategically hiding the water stain on my ceiling and the mildew creeping along the shower grout. I was 33 years old, not young enough to be genuinely appealing but not old enough to have any kind of distinguished look, just average in every way that mattered. But according to Jennifer's friend Amanda, who drunkenly hit on me at multiple barbecues, I had that working man aesthetic that apparently appealed to certain demographics, whatever that meant. The first 2 weeks brought 47 subscribers at $15 monthly each, which wasn't life-changing money, but was enough to finally get my truck's transmission fixed properly, instead of just patching it temporarily and hoping. The content I posted was deliberately simple. Photos after work still wearing my shop uniform with grease on my forearms, occasional videos where I talked about my day while working on personal projects, the kind of authentic, blue-collar content that apparently filled some niche I hadn't known existed. Most subscribers were respectful and straightforward, middle-aged women from various parts of the country who sent small tips with comments about appreciating a man who worked with his hands, who seemed genuine and approachable, who reminded them of husbands or boyfriends, or the kind of man they wished they'd married. The messages were sometimes lonely and often sweet, and I found myself actually engaging with people in ways that felt more authentic than most of my real-life interactions. Then in late June, this account appeared called GoldenEye 369, and they immediately stood out by sending a $200 tip on my welcome message without requesting anything specific in return. No special content, no private photos, no personal information, just money and a vague comment about liking my authenticity. Over the next 10 days, they dropped another 100 here, 50 there, always with minimal commentary, but consistent generosity that made them my top subscriber by a significant margin. The money was significant enough that I didn't question it too carefully. Nearly $800 from one person in less than 2 weeks, enough to catch up on overdue utility bills and even take Kaylee to Cedar Point for her birthday, something I'd promised her 6 months ago but hadn't been able to afford until GoldenEye 369's tips made it possible. Jennifer actually smiled when I showed up to get Kaylee for our amusement park day, genuinely pleased that I'd followed through on something for once, and that brief moment of not being seen as a complete failure felt better than any amount of money. The first real request came on a Friday night when I was already exhausted from a 10-hour shift dealing with a particularly difficult engine rebuild. GoldenEye 369 messaged about wanting a private video call, just 15 minutes, nothing complicated, willing to pay $500 for the session. $500 for 15 minutes was more than I made in 2 full days at the shop, and with rent due Monday, and my bank account showing negative $27, I wasn't in a position to turn down that kind of offer. We scheduled it for 11 that night after I got home and showered the worst of the day's grime off. They insisted on using a platform called Secure Stream instead of OnlyFans' built-in video system, claiming they had privacy concerns about the main platform's security. The website looked legitimate enough, professionally designed with proper SSL certificates and terms of service that seemed standard. Creating an account required my email address and some basic verification, and they had me test my camera and audio before the actual call to ensure everything would work smoothly. At exactly 11, I clicked the call link and immediately noticed their camera feed remained black while mine displayed my face clearly in the corner preview window. They typed in the chat that their camera was malfunctioning, but they could see and hear me perfectly fine, asking if we could proceed anyway since they'd already paid and didn't want to waste my time with technical issues. It seemed slightly odd but not concerning enough to cancel, especially with $500 already in my account. For 15 minutes, I followed their typed directions, took off my shirt when they asked, flexed a little and showed different angles, told a completely fabricated story about a wild weekend in Vegas that had never happened. They kept typing enthusiastic responses and sent another $200 in tips during the call itself, asking me to stand up and turn around, show my tattoos more clearly, all requests that felt completely within the boundaries of what I'd been posting publicly anyway. When the timer hit 15 minutes, the call ended automatically with a message, thanking me for the session and saying I was perfect for what they needed. I felt pretty good about the whole thing. $600 for less than 20 minutes of work, enough to cover rent with some leftover for groceries and maybe even putting a little aside for the first time in months. Saturday morning destroyed that brief moment of financial optimism completely. I woke around 10 to my phone buzzing with notification after notification, and when I finally managed to focus on the screen, there were 17 emails from an address I didn't recognize, something Proton Mail with a username. That made my stomach drop even before I opened the first message. The subject line on every email simply said, "Ryan, open this now," using my actual name, which should have been completely unknown to this person. Inside the first email were 3 attachments, crystal clear screenshots from the previous night. Video call showing me shirtless and clearly identifiable, my face fully visible in every frame. Worse, in the corner of each image was my complete real name pulled from the secure stream account I'd created, the one I'd stupidly used my actual email address to register. The message itself was devastatingly concise. $5,000 to the Bitcoin wallet address listed below by Monday noon, or these screenshots get sent to Jennifer at her email address, to my boss Brennan at his direct work email, to Columbus City Schools Administration where Kaylee attended, and to all 847 people on my Facebook friends list, which they'd somehow scraped from my private profile. At the bottom was a line that made me actually run to the bathroom to vomit. "We recorded everything, including the parts where you got more comfortable. Pay up or everyone sees who Ryan really is." I read that email probably 60 times, each reading hoping it would somehow change or reveal itself as a sick joke or just evaporate into digital nothing. $5,000 might as well have been $5 million given my financial reality. My bank account showed $247. My credit cards were maxed. My truck was worth maybe $3,000 if I could find someone desperate enough to buy it. I had nothing remotely resembling the amount they were demanding. My friend Craig, who understood computers better than anyone I knew, listened to my deliberately vague explanation about being blackmailed, trying to figure out if there was any way to trace Proton Mail accounts or if Bitcoin transactions could be reversed. He laughed in that way people do when delivering bad news, explaining that whoever was behind this had chosen their tools specifically because they were nearly impossible to trace, that Proton Mail kept no logs, and Bitcoin transactions were designed to be irreversible and anonymous. The screenshot quality was horrifyingly perfect too, not grainy or distorted or easily deniable, but clear professional captures that showed my face and body in detail that left no room for claiming it was someone else or doctored images. The kind of evidence that would spread through my small suburban community like wildfire, ending up on Kaylee's classmates' phones. By Monday afternoon, making her teenage years an absolute nightmare of mockery and association with her father's humiliation, I spent Sunday in a desperate scramble that felt like drowning in slow motion. Sold my PlayStation to some college kid for $300, way below its actual value, but I needed immediate cash and couldn't afford to wait for better offers. Drove 2 hours to Dayton because someone there had agreed to buy an old Mustang engine block I'd been storing in my garage, paying 600% cash without asking too many questions about why I seemed so desperate. My brother Doug came through with $1,500 after I fed him an elaborate lie about my truck needing emergency transmission work, or I'd lose my job and couldn't make child support payments. The guilt of lying to him made my chest physically hurt, but the fear of what would happen if those screenshots leaked was overwhelming enough to justify any deception. I maxed out all 3 credit cards, doing cash advances at different ATMs, paying the predatory fees because I had no other options, and Monday's deadline was approaching with terrifying speed. By Sunday night at 2 in the morning, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by crumpled bills and bank transfer confirmations, counting and recounting obsessively. $4,047, representing literally everything I could scrape together through selling possessions and borrowing and extracting the last drops of credit from financial institutions. I was still short, but maybe they'd understand. Maybe they'd accept what I had. Maybe they'd show some mercy to someone who was clearly trying. Monday morning at 8 sharp, I sent my first email to the gotcha.forever88 address, explaining in detail that I had most of the money and begging for either more time or acceptance of what I'd managed to gather, promising to delete my OnlyFans account immediately and never engage in anything like this again. Their response came 12 minutes later, cold and absolute. Full amount or photos go out at noon. No negotiations. Clock's ticking. The panic that followed was different from anything I'd experienced before. Called in sick to work and spent the morning driving to payday loan places. Getting rejected at 2 locations for having too much existing debt. Finally finding a predatory operation behind a liquor store that gave me $300 at an interest rate I didn't even look at. Sold my spare tire and jack to a mechanic friend for $50. Found $43 in change by searching my couch, my car, every pocket, and every piece of clothing I owned. At 11:47 a.m., I initiated the Bitcoin transfer for exactly $5,000, watching my entire life savings plus crushing debt I'd be paying off for years disappear into some anonymous cryptocurrency wallet that could be anywhere in the world. The confirmation came at 12:03 p.m., a brief message that made my blood run cold despite technically being what I wanted to hear. Payment received. Your secret is safe for now. Those 3 words, for now, with their implicit threat of future demands, made it clear this wasn't over. People who do this kind of thing don't just walk away after one successful score. They'd extracted $5,000 from me, proving I could be milked, establishing that I'd pay to protect my reputation and my daughter's well-being. I'd marked myself as a reliable target, someone who would scramble and borrow and sell everything to meet their demands. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I went to work, picked up extra shifts to start paying Doug back, deleted every trace of my online presence, changed my phone number and email address. The silence was somehow worse than the threats had been. Every notification making my heart race, every unknown number at the shop making me want to hide. When Jennifer called about picking up Kaylee for the weekend, I nearly vomited thinking she'd somehow seen the screenshots. But it was just normal custody logistics, her voice carrying its usual tone of mild annoyance rather than disgust or fury. Then Wednesday afternoon, while I was under a Honda Accord changing oil, Craig texted that I had a visitor at the shop. I rolled out to find a kid who couldn't have been older than 19 holding an envelope, with my name written in the same precise handwriting from the first threatening email. Inside was a single printed screenshot I hadn't seen before, much more explicit than the previous ones, clearly from later in that video call when they directed me to do things I'd convinced myself weren't that bad in the moment. The note attached was brief and devastating, 2,000 by Friday. Or this one goes viral on Twitter with your full name and city. Previous payment only covered the first batch. The implication that there were multiple batches, that they'd been sitting on this content and rationing their extortion, made me realize I'd been monumentally stupid to think one payment would end this. This time I didn't panic or scramble. I drove straight to the Columbus Police Department and asked to speak with someone about cybercrime and blackmail. Detective Fowler was probably my age, but looked a decade older, with tired eyes and coffee stains on her shirt that suggested she'd been dealing with humanity's worst behaviors for too long. She listened to my complete story without judgment, took notes while I showed her the emails and Bitcoin transactions and screenshots I'd saved as evidence. After 40 minutes of me explaining everything, she leaned back in her chair and delivered the news that shattered whatever naive hope I'd been carrying. The Proton Mail account was effectively untraceable. Without a warrant, they'd never get approved based on my evidence. The Bitcoin wallet had already been tumbled through 6 different exchanges across 4 countries, making any recovery impossible. GoldenEye 369's OnlyFans account had been created through a VPN that bounced through servers in Romania, Vietnam, and Nigeria, each layer making identification more difficult. These operations are almost always run from countries where we have zero jurisdiction, she explained, sliding me a pamphlet about cybercrime that felt like an insult wrapped in bureaucracy. Even if we could identify them, which is virtually impossible with the tools they're using, they're probably in a place where local law enforcement won't cooperate or doesn't have the resources to pursue these cases. Your best bet is to refuse to pay anymore, document everything you can, and consider telling the people in your life before they do it for you. I didn't pay the second demand. Couldn't even if I'd wanted to, already drowning in debt from the first payment and working 70-hour weeks just to cover minimum payments on the payday loans and credit cards I'd maxed out. Friday came and went without incident. Then, Saturday, Sunday, a week of silence that felt like holding my breath underwater. Every notification made me flinch. Every unknown number made me prepare for Jennifer's rage, or my boss's disappointment, or Kaylee's traumatized confusion about what her father had done. The screenshots never appeared on Twitter or anywhere else I could find through obsessive searching. After 3 weeks of checking my mentions and searching my name hourly, I started thinking maybe Detective Fowler had been right about calling their bluff, that they'd moved on to easier targets who would keep paying. But that relief was poisoned by the knowledge that they still had that content, still had my name and face, and enough information to destroy my reputation whenever they felt like it. It's been 9 months now since that video call, and while nothing else has happened directly, the psychological damage is permanent and complete. I had to tell Jennifer about the debt when I was late on child support twice in 3 months, inventing a gambling problem because it was easier to admit than the truth. And now she barely lets me see Kaylee unsupervised, convinced I'm some kind of degenerate who can't be trusted with basic responsibilities or good judgment. I changed jobs to a different auto shop across town, moved to a cheaper apartment that's basically a glorified storage unit with plumbing, deleted every social media account I had. I've become a ghost of my former self, avoiding any digital footprint that might remind those people I still exist and could be squeezed for more money. Every new person I meet, every potential relationship or friendship comes with this invisible weight of knowing that somewhere out there, someone has ammunition that could detonate my life at any moment. The other night I got a spam email about cryptocurrency investment opportunities, completely unrelated to any of this, just standard junk mail. But seeing those words, Bitcoin and anonymous transactions in the subject line, sent me into such a severe panic attack that I dry heaved in my bathroom for 20 minutes, my heart hammering so hard I thought I was having a genuine medical emergency. That's what they took from me beyond the $5,000. They took my ability to feel safe in digital spaces, my capacity to trust that any online interaction won't be weaponized against me later. Sometimes I wonder how many other men are living with this same secret shame, too embarrassed to admit they fell for something so obvious in retrospect, too scared to go to the police. Because it means confessing to creating adult content, too isolated to reach out for help. Because the whole situation feels like admitting you're fundamentally stupid and gullible. The platforms don't talk about this side of content creation. The way your images can be captured and your identity can be traced and your entire life can be held hostage by people who understand technology better than you ever will. Kaylee asks sometimes why I seem so jumpy, why I don't have social media anymore like her friends. Parents do. Why I check my phone with this look of dread every time a notification comes through. I tell her I'm just tired, that work has been stressful, that I'm trying to focus more on real life instead of screens. She's 14 now, old enough to sense there's more to the story, but young enough to accept my explanations without pushing too hard. In 6 years, when she's looking at colleges, will those screenshots suddenly surface as some final twist of the knife? Will her classmates find them during some cruel prank and associate her forever with her father's humiliation? The debt will take me approximately 4 more years to pay off at my current income level, assuming no emergencies or unexpected expenses, which is a laughable assumption for someone living paycheck to paycheck. Every dollar that goes to those payday loans and credit card minimums is a dollar that can't go to Kaylee's future or my own stability or building any kind of life beyond just surviving. They didn't just take $5,000. They took years of my financial future, my peace of mind, my ability to sleep without nightmares about waking up to find my face plastered across social media with my worst moments displayed for entertainment. Detective Fowler was right about one thing. These operations work because they understand human psychology better than we understand it ourselves. They know exactly how much shame and fear to apply, how to isolate their targets, how to make paying seem like the only option, even when it guarantees nothing. They know that men especially won't report this kind of extortion because it means admitting vulnerability in ways our culture has trained us to avoid. They know that once you pay the first time, you've established yourself as someone who will sacrifice everything to keep a secret, making you a permanent target even after they've extracted whatever initial amount they demanded. I drive past the library sometimes where they offer free computer classes and cybersecurity workshops, and I think about how none of that information would have saved me. I knew about VPNs and privacy settings and being careful with personal information, but all that knowledge was useless against someone who was actively hunting, who had built their entire operation around exploiting the gap between what people think is private and what actually is. The internet promises anonymity and control, but those promises are only as good as the weakest link in your security chain. And for me, that weak link was desperation and naivety and the fundamental human need to believe that some opportunities are legitimate even when they seem too good to be true. Last month I saw a young guy at the new shop where I work, probably 25 years old, complaining about student debt and rent increases, and I watched him scroll through his phone during lunch break, looking at ways to make extra money online. I wanted to warn him, to tell him my story, to explain that whatever he was considering probably wasn't worth the risk. But how do you start that conversation without revealing your own humiliation? How do you say, don't make the mistake I made, without explaining exactly what that mistake was? So I said nothing, just watched him scrolling and hoping, and wondered if somewhere in a different country, someone was preparing the same trap that caught me, building the same false promises and technical infrastructure designed to extract money from desperate people who just wanted to pay their bills and take their kids to amusement parks. The internet has made it possible for predators to operate at scale, targeting hundreds or thousands of people simultaneously with automated systems and stolen credentials and deep fakes and extortion schemes that would have been impossible 20 years ago. The worst part is knowing they were right about me. I was exactly the kind of desperate, financially vulnerable man they were looking for. Someone with debt and responsibilities and a fragile social standing that could be destroyed. By exposure, someone who would pay anything to protect the few good things left in his life. They didn't choose me randomly. They chose me because I'd already advertised my vulnerability by trying to make money through content creation, essentially putting up a sign that said, I need cash badly enough to do things that make me uncomfortable. I still check my email obsessively, multiple times per hour, always expecting another demand that will arrive when I've finally started breathing normally again. The therapy I can't afford would probably say something about hypervigilance and trauma responses, about how my brain is stuck in that moment of opening those first threatening emails and realizing my entire life could be destroyed by someone I'd never met and couldn't identify. But therapy costs money I don't have, so instead I just live with this constant low-grade panic, this background noise of dread that colors every interaction and decision. Sometimes Kaylee does something that reminds me of why I tried OnlyFans in the first place, asks about a school trip I can't afford, needs new clothes I have to put on a credit card, mentions something her friends have that she doesn't, and I want to tell her that I tried, that I did something stupid and humiliating because I wanted to give her opportunities and experiences, that my failure to protect her from my own bad judgment is the heaviest thing I carry. But she's a kid, and kids shouldn't have to carry their parents' shame or understand the complicated ways adults fail while trying to succeed. The man I was before that video call feels like a different person entirely. That version of Ryan thought he was being clever and resourceful, finding a creative solution to a financial problem. He thought he understood the risks and had taken appropriate precautions. He believed that desperation justified certain choices as long as nobody got hurt. He was naive in ways that current Ryan can see clearly but couldn't prevent, trapped in the past watching his former self walk into an obvious trap while being completely unable to warn him or change his trajectory. What I know now that I didn't know then is that privacy is an illusion we maintain through collective agreement to respect boundaries, and when someone decides they don't care about those boundaries, when someone has the technical skills and moral vacancy to violate them systematically, there's almost nothing you can do to stop them. The locks on your digital life are only as strong as the weakest password, the least secure platform, the most trusting moment. When you entered your real name into a website because it looked legitimate and you were too desperate to be properly paranoid. I'll probably carry this secret until I die, never telling Kaylee or Jennifer or Doug or anyone who knows me in real life. It'll be this thing that lives in my chest like a tumor, growing heavier over the years, shaping every decision about relationships and employment and online presence. And somewhere out there, those files still exist on someone's hard drive, with my face and my name and my moment of vulnerability preserved forever, waiting to be used again whenever they decide I'm worth squeezing one more time. That's the real horror of what happened, not just the money or the fear or the shame, but the knowledge that I'll never be completely free of it. That every moment of peace is conditional. Every plan for the future is built on the unstable foundation of hoping that strangers in another country have forgotten I exist or found more profitable targets. I'm a ghost haunting my own life, scared of my own digital shadow, and there's no exorcism or purification that can make me clean again. Just survival, one day at a time, hoping that today isn't the day those Screenshots finally surface and finish what they started 9 months ago.